a superior sort of city car, Seat's Little Me offers its Spanish brand a leading role in a sub-supermini segment already heavily influenced by its Volkswagen and Skoda design stablemates. The Iberian maker has added a thoughtful value proposition to a car that's undoubtedly spacious, frugal and clever. It makes an awful lot of sense. A Me. If you've ever played on a Nintendo Wii gaming console, then you'll know exactly what that is. It's an extension of you, the fun, young, effervescent, bubbly kind of you you'd like to be. Exactly the right sort of name, you might think, for a car that aims to create these same sorts of feelings in the dull mundanity of our everyday short journeying, city shopping and school-run dominated lives. This, if you didn't already know, is the Seat branded version of what is arguably the cleverest tiny runabout on the planet, sharing almost everything with a Volkswagen version of this same design badged as the Up. Nothing wrong with that. Today, almost all sub-supermini city runabouts are built around brand sharing principles, something that Seat is well familiar with, as its previous and very successful entrant in this segment, the Arossa, was another Volkswagen clone. You might expect things to be a bit more difficult this time around though, for in the modern era, the Volkswagen Group's city car design must also be made available to Skoda, who badge it as the Citigo. So, can this Seat stand out? Well, the Spaniards reckon so. They've carefully pitched this Me's value proposition to appeal to their traditional buyers, people who don't want a budget brand, but like the technology that goes with a smart badge without the expense that usually accompanies it. People who, in this model, are going to be buying into what on paper at least seems to be city car state of the art. Let's put it to the test. This Seat's 3-cylinder 1-litre petrol power plant suits it perfectly, which is just as well because it's the only engine choice on offer, though with the option of either 60 or 75 PS outputs. 3-cylinder engines are, by their very nature, fun little things, cheeky, just a little bit vocal, with a busy, buzzy demeanour that plays with his subconscious and makes the car feel alive, which is quite a task for something that packs such a modest amount of punch. Personally, I'd think twice about paying extra for the 75 PS version. Subjectively, after all, it feels hardly any faster, even if on paper the rest to 60 time improves from 14.4 to 13.2 seconds, and the maximum speed improves from as little as 99 miles an hour to 108 miles an hour. And the discussion's a pretty pointless one anyway, since no one bases their city car decision on how quickly you can flog the thing from rest to 60. All that really matters is whether this engine has enough about it to jink around in the traffic light Grand Prix that is modern day city motoring. It does, just about. The engine has just enough torque, a hardly rippling 95 Newton meters, to ensure that you're not always bothering the gearbox, which is just as well because gear shift quality isn't one of this Seat's strongest points, with a firm hand and a 1, pause 2 action across the gate, necessary if you're not to rush the synchro. An engine then that doesn't encourage press-on driving, but one that'll happily shoot you from point to point in a way suggesting that it might be quite fun, out of the city limits. It is too. Though this isn't the best driver's car in its class, there are others with less body roll and more feelsome steering. It is one in which you can confidently have fun thanks to predictable responses and plenty of grip. It would be better still on twisty roads were it not for the engineer's sensible decision to prioritise ride comfort over on-the-limit handling, something that helps enormously when it comes to tackling the ruts, bumps and potholes of our city streets. There's a real maturity to the way that this Seat rides down any given road that'll be sure to appeal to those looking to downsize into something more manageably priced. The electric power steering's light and effort-free in a car as nippy and manoeuvrable as you'd want any city tiddler to be, with just under 3 turns lock to lock and a 9.8 metre turning circle so tight that if you're driving along and you spot a potential space over the other side of the road, then you're likely to be able to respond taxi style and turn straight into it. Now, if this is your usual operating environment, then you'll probably also want to consider the slightly jerky, robotised semi-automatic 5-speeder that represents Seat's clutchless option. Personally, I'd stick with the ordinary 5-speed manual gearbox if I possibly could. Around town, the thick A-pillars here can limit your visibility at junctions or coming onto roundabouts. But there's a peace of mind, if you've specified it and if your car has ESP stability control fitted, of the City Safety Assist system. Automatically activated at speeds of under 19 miles an hour, this uses a laser sensor situated in the upper part of the windscreen here to continually scan the road ahead for potential collision hazards. If one is detected and the driver doesn't respond, then the brakes are primed. If the driver does then brake, then braking power is maximised. The system can even autonomously apply the brakes if it thinks you're about to be rear-ended. Very clever. The exterior design of this Me follows a theme first pioneered by the Peugeot 107, Citroën C1 and Toyota Aygo model we first saw way back in 2006. So here again you get a cheeky face with big headlights, a gently rising waistline and a glass rear tailgate. Differentiation over this model's Volkswagen and Skoda clones is limited to restyling of the C-pillar, the bonnet and the boot. Just enough, in other words, to give this Seat a bit of its own identity. There was little point, after all, in too heavily reinventing what was already a very clever piece of design, one that owes much to the way that things are configured under the bonnet. Actually, the engine nearly wasn't situated up front at all, original design studies having placed it at the back. That wasn't viable for production, but something nearly as clever was, namely the positioning of the cooling system alongside rather than in front of the engine. Doesn't sound very important, does it? But it could very well be behind the main reason you'll be tempted to buy this car. After all, that clever engineering tweak releases 100mm of space that would normally be wasted in the engine bay, allowing this design to be no longer than the city car norm, yet offer substantially more space inside. To put it another way, you've a total vehicle length of around 3.5 metres, yet a wheelbase that takes up 2.5 metres of that, which means that though this Me is no longer than a Fiat 500, it offers substantially more space inside. Room, in fact, for the 4 fully sized adults who could never comfortably fit inside the apparently space-efficient Italian car. Those destined for the rear will of course much prefer it if you specified the 5-door version of this Seat. Mind you, access isn't too awkward in this 3-door variant, but the 5-door will obviously be much easier if you're lumping about child seats and the like. Now, once you're in situ back here, one of the first things you'll notice is the size of these rear side windows that create excellent all-round visibility and reduce the feeling of claustrophobia that you'd otherwise get. The rear seat backs are a bit more upright than you might expect, which won't be a problem for smaller passengers, but might be an issue for lankier folk. Up front, if like me you've tried the Volkswagen and Skoda versions of this design, the first impression that you'll get here is of an extra spark and vibrancy to the cabin finish. Some of it's down to little things like the italicized graphics on the instrument dials, and some of it's down to sheer flair in the way that the cabin has been styled and appointed. The white dash panels on this particular car, for example, that brighten up the interior without leaving it feeling self-consciously funky. You could argue that the end result isn't quite as classy as a Volkswagen Up, but the differences are marginal, and in both cases those soft-touch plastics are notable by their absence. The end result feels of decent quality thanks to a careful choice of trim and materials. You sit behind a large 3-spoke magnesium frame steering wheel that unfortunately doesn't adjust for reach, it only goes up and down, but it frames a simple, clearly designated instrument cluster with a trendily large speedometer, while a compact centre pod sits in the middle of the dash and houses many of the minor controls. Build quality seems good from the Slovakian factory. When you twist the fascia air vents, for example, they locate with a well-rounded click. Only a few touches betray this model's lowly standing within the Seat model lineup. The fact, for example, that the electric window switches aren't illuminated at night, or the way that you have to reach right across the cabin to buzz down that on the passenger side. But there's certainly a practical element to this cabin, with bottle holders in each of the doors, and a glove box that includes space for notes, for a pen, and for your sunglasses. Plus, there are no fewer than 4 cup holders dotted around the cabin. For me, though, the cleverest touch is this one, the Seat Portable System. It's a neat 5-inch colour Navigon touchscreen that you can carry around in your pocket or your handbag and then just clip on above the centre console when you're ready to use the car. It incorporates a satellite navigation system, a hands-free telephone unit, a media player, and even vehicle information graphics. There are 4 basic menus: car info, media, navigation, and phone. In car info, you've got a trip computer that can show you everything from a trip meter to your average speed, your driving range, and your average consumption. In navigation, which can be specified to display in 3D, you can locate anything from local car parks to places of interest. And if you park up and take the screen with you, it'll even guide you back to your car if you forget where you parked it. In media, you can play music from SD cards and MP3 players and even display your photos. And in phone, well, you can, as you'd expect, connect up to any Bluetooth enabled device and use voice activated control. This infotainment device can be cleverer still if you download onto it a whole range of apps, but I'll let your dealer tell you all about that. Now, that only leaves luggage space, which gives me another chance to underline the packaging genius of this design with a stat that perfectly sums it up. This Mi is only 2 millimeters longer than Seat's previous Arossa city car, yet its 251 litre boot is double the size. It can take objects of up to 58 centimetres in height. It features 4 bag hooks, and you can specify a very useful double storage net to prevent your eggs from mixing with your iron brew. And of course, you can massively extend it by pushing forward the rear bench. Unfortunately, it's only split folding in plusher models like this one. And if you do push forward that bench, then you'll get up to 951 litres in this 3-door model of total fresh air. Unfortunately, not completely flat. Up to 959 litres if you've gone for the 5-door version. And that's nearly twice as much as you get in, say, a Peugeot 107 or a Mini. Expect to pay somewhere in the £8,000 to £11,000 bracket for your Seat Mi, with a £350 premium if you want 5 doors rather than 3. Now, as you would expect, that's in the same kind of ballpark as the 2 cars that share this same basic design. Volkswagen's Up, which costs a sniff more, and the Skoda Citigo, which model for model costs around £200 less. Dig a bit deeper into the detail though, and there are certainly arguments in this Seat's favour. Many buyers, for example, will want an entry-level 60 PS model with extra cost air conditioning and the affordable option of ESP stability control. Now, that's simply not possible if you go for the Skoda or the Volkswagen. Neither offers the option of air conditioning at very basic entry level, and with both, ESP is really quite expensive as an extra. With a Seat Mi, in contrast, you can have air conditioning and ESP at an affordable price in the very basic model. Which means that if you've done your homework like this, then it could well be the Seat version of this city car design that you might be tempted to choose. But not, of course, until you've satisfied yourself that it stacks up against other contenders in the city car segment. Now, there are so many of these that it's tempting to be daunted here, but don't be. After all, many so-called competitors are actually quite easy to ignore. Take the whole clutch of three-door only so-called rivals that in their most affordable forms are far pricier to buy and more costly to run than a Seat Mii. And of course you've got the restriction of only being able to choose 3 doors. You've got the same kind of restriction with a clutch of 5-door only rivals, cars like Hyundai's i10 or Fiat's Panda, that though they may be able to shade this Seat on price, are far more expensive when it comes to running costs. That leaves a few contenders though that you should consider. Take the car that's sold here as either the Peugeot 107, the Citroën C1 or the Toyota Aygo. It costs around the same as this Seat and also rivals it on the balance sheet. But despite recent facelifts, this remains a 10-year-old model available with just one engine and just one output. And as you might expect, what's possible in small car design has moved on quite a bit in the last decade. Which, to give you one example, is why this Seat has a boot almost twice as big as a 107, a C1 or an Aygo. And if I wanted this kind of car, I'd want that kind of extra space. For much the same reason, exactly the same issue applies if you're comparing against the design sold in the UK as either a Nissan Pixo or a Suzuki Alto, except that with these two models you get an even tinier boot. And though the Alto Pixo may save you a few £100s in the showroom, you really pay for that with a cheap feeling cabin. For me, a much better rival is Kia's Picanto, but here again you get a smallish boot and with pokier versions a price tag that's way more expensive than models in the Seat lineup. Let's say then that you've been through the comparison process and you've chosen this Seat. Whichever 3 or 5-door variant you select, with either the 60 PS or the 75 PS engine with the manual or the automatic gearbox, you'll find most of the basic features you'd expect at this kind of level. So all models get a decent quality MP3 compatible CD stereo with an aux-in socket, body colour bumpers, daytime running lights, tinted glass and a 12-volt power point. If all that's a bit hair shirt for you, then you'll be far better served at the air-conditioned SE trim level that I've got here. Now, in this case, there's less of the penny-pinching meanness. So, as well as the air-conditioned cabin, you get remote central locking, a rear seat that 60/40 split folds, body colour for the door handles and the mirrors, and windows that you don't have to wind up yourself, 70s style. Of course, there are plenty of tempting options to consider, available either by ascending the model range or trawling through the options list. Things like cruise control, a lovely glass panoramic sunroof or rear parking sensors. I also expect many buyers will tick the box for the Seat portable system, a really clever box of tricks that's essentially a 5-inch colour touchscreen that plugs into a cradle on the dash and gives you sat-nav, Bluetooth phone, media player and car info functions. More important than any of that, though, is the need to spend a couple of £100 extra on the potentially life-saving ESP stability control system. Apart from anything else, it then gives you access to what is arguably this car's cleverest optional feature, the accident-saving City Safety Assist system. Now, using a laser sensor mounted at the top of the windscreen here, it's able to scan the road ahead for potential collisions and at speeds of under 19 miles an hour, even autonomously brake the car for you. That's one safety feature. Another is the fact that all Miis come fitted with the expected 4 airbags, and there's the option of 2 more. Plus, as you'd expect, there's anti-lock brakes with brake assist to help you in an emergency stop, and ASR traction control, as well as ISOFIX child seat fastenings. It all adds up to a 5-star Euro NCAP safety rating. Though Britain does without the CNG gas-powered version of this car offered in mainland Europe, and there's no diesel option of any kind, it's still true that you'd have to be dragging an anchor around behind your Seat Me for it to be anything other than hilariously economical. Now, a curb weight of well below 900 kilograms helps here, as does clever engineering of the kind that you'll find on the economy champion of the range, the 60 PS Ecomotive variant. Now, in its standard form, this engine is already pretty frugal, delivering 62.8 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out 105 grams per kilometre of CO2. But the Ecomotive model goes still further, using a battery regeneration system to reduce alternator drag, ultra low friction ancillary components, and most of all, best of all, a start-stop system that'll cut the engine when you don't need it, stuck in traffic like this or waiting at the lights. And as a result, a Me 60 PS Ecomotive is capable of returning 68.9 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle and putting out just 96 grams per kilometre of CO2. There are a few caveats I should mention though, like the fact that unlike the Skoda and Volkswagen versions of this design, you can't have the start-stop and eco-driving package I've just mentioned if you want to specify the 75 PS variant. Another difference to the Citigo and the Up is that you can't have the automatic gearbox if you go for the 60 PS variant. But where you do get it, on the 75 PS model, it makes a good case for itself, delivering fuel and CO2 returns that are actually marginally better than the equivalent manual model. Now, the reason for that is that this automatic isn't really an automatic at all. Rather, it's a manual gearbox without a clutch that's been electronically programmed to change up at the most economical points. Insurance groupings ranging between 1 and 2 on the 1 to 50 grouping scale are class leading, a bit better than the Peugeot 107, Citroën C1 and Toyota Aygo design, much better than a Fiat Panda and way better than a Kia Picanto. And that could make all the difference if you're a young driver looking for your first set of wheels. Residual values are also up near the top of the class too, something else that should drive down the overall total cost of ownership. Service intervals are every 20,000 miles with an oil change every 10,000 miles. There's a 3-year 60,000 mile warranty with 2 years of Europe-wide SEAT roadside assistance. It's an impressive financial picture. So, SEAT at last has a class-leading city car. The brand has waited long enough for one. True, it's a model that may not be uniquely Spanish, but then nothing SEAT makes ever is. What's important is that it ticks all the vital city car boxes, as do, you could argue, the Volkswagen and Skoda versions of this same design, which means that your buying decision might well come down to the value proposition on offer. SEAT feels confident here. Look beyond the list pricing and you start to see why. Specify this car as many will want to, and it makes a strong case for itself against its in-house design rivals. And an even better one if you're comparing against something else entirely in the city car segment. Ultimately, it'll come down to personal preference, of course. Your Me always should reflect your personality, and you'll find this one ready to do just that.